Hello and welcome once again to Iowa News and Views. My name's Derek Maurer and I'll be your waiter this evening, serving up a healthy portion of topical discussion and timely commentary on issues and themes of concern to all Iowans. And in addition to that, we're going to have another video tableau from the Iowa State Fair, so please stay with us. Our topic tonight is a consumer's guide to what ails Iowa agriculture right now. We're all I think aware of the distress that's in the agricultural community. Prices are pretty low, farm income is dropping. I think the state reported recently a 40% drop from 1997 to 98. And there's a lot of talk about what to do about that. Our guest this evening is John Whitaker. John, in addition to being a farmer and county supervisor in Van Buren County, is also president of the Iowa Farmers Union.
Yes.
John, thank you very much for being with us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the chance to be here and discuss these issues.
Well, you know that our audience is primarily in the larger communities in Iowa, people with cable access, and so most of us are consumers, we're not producers. But of course, being Iowans, we all hear a lot about the agricultural economy, and we're hearing about the distress that's taking place. And I think we were thinking about this show as introducing consumers to some of the issues to think about as they hear about these problems.
And that's an important point. You know, consumers have a big stake in agriculture because as consumers, we're all involved. We all eat. So we really have a stake in what is happening to agriculture today.
Our dollars vote.
Our dollars vote.
Well, I wonder if it would be helpful to maybe explain a little bit about how this agricultural economy is supposed to work. All my life I've lived in Iowa, and I've never heard that it really worked the way it was supposed to. It seems to me sometimes that the only way to be successful as a farmer is to be the one farmer with a good crop in a bad crop year. But maybe you can tell us a little bit about how is it supposed to work? Who do you sell your crops to, and how does the food get from the farm to the supermarket?
I sell my grain crops to a local elevator, and then they're either corn is processed, most of corn is processed into feed, a little of it's exported, and a little of it is processed into what we call industrial uses, which are high fructose corn syrup, like pop is made out of, or regular cornstarch. Soybeans, most of that goes to animal feeds. So, you know, it's a process of putting value in what we produce. And traditionally, in Iowa, we have used our own crops as farmers to feed our own livestock, and then we marketed that crop through livestock. That system's been upset a lot because of the large corporate agriculture, corporate livestock production facilities that have moved into our state and our nation. It kind of throws takes a link out of the chain for us.
So is there a real qualitative difference between now and 1 decade ago, now and 2 decades ago in that regard?
I'd say there's a qualitative difference between now and 2 decades ago. This process was just starting of the integration of the hog and cattle industry a decade ago. It really wasn't with us 2 decades ago. I started farming 20 years ago, and there was an opportunity for a young person to get in and for a minimal investment get into livestock production, rent some ground to produce corn and soybeans for feed, and be able to make a living. That opportunity is really limited right now, because of low prices, because of the cost of getting in.
Well, you talked about the chain being broken, and where is it broken?
It's really kind of broken in that link between grain producers and livestock producers. There are still a lot of grain producers who are livestock producers, but many grain producers moved out of livestock production when we started exporting large amounts, and not necessarily as a proportion of our product that we produce, large amounts of corn and soybeans, but more than we had been in the past. Corn's exports over the past 25 years still remain 20% of what we produce. That has grown only because we produce a little more corn now. But some people think that if we just get that export up there, then I can produce corn at a profitable level and not have to put the work into livestock. And I don't feel that that's a good situation for agriculture. I think that family farmers should be utilizing that corn and that raw product that they produce to feed their own livestock, because I believe that they do a better job of taking care of that livestock.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The squeeze that farmers are finding themselves in right now, commodity prices are very low. We've heard from some that the price you can get for it doesn't even cover your cost of production in some cases. How are farmers staying in business through this cycle?
Well, the cost that farmers are receiving really doesn't cover the cost of production in any case of grain right now. And I guess this may not be the best example, but if a person has too much debt on their credit card, they can get a home equity loan and move that into the equity that they have in their house, in their home. It's a similar situation in agriculture. If a producer is not able to cover all of 1 year's expenses, they roll that debt over into the equity that they have in their operation. Now, that equity is dropping rapidly in the last 2 years. Some estimates say that of the segment of our farmers who were really strong financially 2 years ago, 80% of them have dropped a complete notch to where we would just call them stable now. They're not strong anymore, they're just stable. In another 2 years, they'll move into the weak category because they borrow so much against that equity just to keep going. It's not a good situation because that begins to spiral down the value of those assets. In a couple of years, it begins to be reflected in land values, and we saw that in the 80s. When land values start to collapse, then that equity value collapses, and all of a sudden a person's really in bankruptcy when they didn't borrow any more money. They just can't pay for what they did borrow. They can't pay it back.
How bad is it out there?
It's bad when the figures that I just used, that 80% of that segment of agriculture who were stable, you know, probably didn't owe anybody anything, are now in strong. They owe some money. They've used up some of their equity by, say, an intermediate term loan or something. This is a serious, serious situation, more serious than the 80s, simply because in the 80s it was a debt crisis. A lot of producers had too much borrowed money. When you've got a lot of borrowed money and you've got a good income, though, you can work at paying that off. If you're making a profit, you can make your payments through that profit. This is a different crisis because farmers aren't making a profit. They're not able to make those payments. This is an income crisis. And when you have an income crisis and you don't see anything out there that's going to raise that level of income, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. I guess we've reached the situation of where the last person here, please shut the light out. Well, there's several of us left, but the light has been shut out already.
What do you think that means for consumers? We go to the grocery store and we still find the shelves well stocked. How can we become aware? How can we understand what the producers are going through right now?
I think that consumers need to have, I guess, have a stake in where they want agriculture to go. Do they want their food produced by the large corporate farms that we're seeing take over the livestock industry? Or do they want their food produced by family farmers? You know, and they really, we have to have a mechanism where they can go into the grocery store and find a product that product says this was produced by Iowa's family farmers. Buying this product means that you're supporting Iowa's family farmers in a way that they can make a living, that they can sustain their operation. We need to set up that type of system. But consumers need to be ready to grasp a hold of that system when it is there. It will take retail demand. They will have to walk into the grocery store and say, why can't I find this product? Do you offer it? If not, why don't you offer it? Because buying retail space is sometimes difficult. Grocery stores don't just stock a product because a salesman comes in and says, I think that you should stock this box of cereal. That grocery store wants to know if there is consumer demand for that box of cereal or that cut of meat or whatever. And so the consumers have got to drive this thing. They've got to demand that family farm products become available to them.
Well, it struck me that you were talking about the link in the chain between the grain producer and the meat producer had been broken, but how much more broken is it then between the producers and the consumers?
That chain is so broken that the consumer has no idea where the product came from, who produced the product, if the product was even produced in the United States. One of the first meat scares that we had with E. coli was hard on those of us in the beef industry, was traced back to imported beef. Beef that could not be imported into the United States. This beef was imported into Canada, and then through what they call transshipping, Canada inspected it and said, well, it's good enough to cross the border into the United States, when it wasn't. And we had an outbreak of E. coli that damaged the U.S. beef industry when this was a product that under our standards would have never gotten in. But a consumer has no idea where that product came from. And I think that we need to have a system of labeling so that consumers know who produced this product, where was it produced. That inspected and approved by the USDA means something. It means that, yes, this is a wholesome product. It wasn't just stamped because, well, it came across the border and they said it was good when it came across. I really think that's one of the things that we've got to have in this country. When I go buy clothes off of a rack, I know where the clothes on that particular shelf or rack came from.
Yeah, it sounds a little complicated, though, if you take your can of soda pop and you think that, you know, part of that is corn that was grown, and a lot of products are like that. They incorporate ingredients from wherever. So anyway, that just seems complicated to me.
It can be complicated, but a lot of the products that are produced that doesn't necessarily have to be that complicated. We know where a pork chop was produced. We know where an apple was produced, or a tomato, or a strawberry, or a potato. You know, we can label those things.
Hold that thought. Let me remind our viewers that you're watching Iowa News and Views. We always like to hear from you. So I think right now we have our email address up there on the screen. Send us your ideas. Let us know what you think of the show. We also have a website. You can go there and you can see pictures of our crew, and you can look at announcements about the show and find out all kinds of interesting things and interesting links. So please join us in that way. I'd like to introduce now the video tableau I promised. You know, if you've been watching the show, that we were at the Iowa State Fair this summer, and iNews's own intrepid Rusty Martin was visiting with people in the swine barns. So if we can roll that, that video tableau, let's take a look at it.
Larry McMullen, Animos, Iowa.
Larry, we're going to be doing a number of shows on hogs and hog prices. It's been a pretty tough year for you?
Well, as for pork producers, yes, it's been a very tough year with break-even or below break-even prices, right.
What could the state government do to help you out? The governor or the legislature, anything?
Well, I don't know. It's just lobby mostly to get better prices on the farm. That's all economically related, so anything we can do to get just better prices. I don't think government loans or anything like that's really going to be the answer.
And your name is?
Jamie Sarin.
And Jamie, where are you from?
Kyoto, Iowa.
Do you raise hogs?
Yes.
Well, can you tell us a little bit about how you're making it through like the last year? It's been a pretty tough year for hog farmers.
Well, it's been tough. You just got to tighten down your belt and try to make ends meet.
Do you farm by yourself?
I'm in partnership with my brothers and my dad.
Is there anything that the governor or the state legislature could have done to could do now to help your operation?
Well, I think they're looking into farm aid and stuff like that for farmers that are struggling and stuff. I think that's going to be well received by the farm people. I guess they've done some investigation as far as prices paid by packers and whatnot, and that's
something that you'd be interested in, like transparent pricing, where the packers have to make clear what it is that they're buying for.
Well, they've been looking into that and doing some of that. I think that's good. I think the biggest thing that we need to work on is getting more exports going. I know the Asian economy's been probably the biggest downfall as far as exporting pork and pork products. We need to regain those markets back. And then I think we as producers are just flat doing too good a job producing too much pork.
Okay, well, John, we couldn't really hear that very well, but I happen to know that the last gentleman was kind of closed by expressing something that we hear very commonly, that really what we need is to export more pork to make that industry profitable for farmers. We were talking a little bit before the show, and I know you have some thoughts on that, but I mean, that is very typically put forward, and it's really one of the only things we hear is to get out of our current difficulties, we need to produce more and export it.
Well, that sounds good. Producers, farmers like that because we like to produce. One of the things we're not very good at is reading our markets and knowing how much we need to produce, and we're producing more than we need to. I'd dearly love to export more, but there's not a market out there for it. The world doesn't need our grain right now. I guess the best example of that is China. You know, this is a nation of 1 billion people, and they feed themselves and export food products. Now, that says a lot about the export market. India, which, you know, 20 years ago, that when they showed pictures of starving children, it was in India. India exports food now, food products. So it sounds good. In theory, it doesn't work that well because the world doesn't need a lot of what we're producing. So really, we need to look at maybe some alternatives, alternatives that we could use as fuel. Yes, ethanol works well, but it's not going to be the huge booming market that a lot of people say, and really, realistically, it's not going to use enough corn to get us out of this situation. We need to find some product other than corn to produce. Earlier we talked about producing biofuels, switchgrass to replace coal. Switchgrass burns very, very hot, would work well in energy production, say electricity production. Farmers need to find something to produce because we just don't market real well. And
so corn and beans, and just more corn and beans isn't the answer? No,
more corn and beans is not the answer. An example that I like to use is one of the largest industries in Iowa is John Deere, and it supports agriculture. When John Deere has too many tractors on the lot, they don't produce more and cut the price. They produce less until they're sold. I think we need to learn a lot from that lesson. That's inventory management.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned switchgrass. You were telling me, is it you or your brother had some?
My brother produces some switchgrass. He mainly produces it for seed and for wildlife cover.
Mm-hmm. Do you see any other alternatives out there that are promising? One thing that's come up in some other states that's pretty controversial, for example, is industrial hemp. Do you think there's any receptivity out there for something like that?
There might be. You'd have to look at what the realistic uses of that are. Is there really a use for that? I hear a lot of it as a fiber use type thing. we've got so much cotton right now that cotton prices they're like corn and beans. It's down in the dumps. So do we really need another natural fiber out there? I'm not sure. I guess I don't see as big a market for hemp as I do for sustainably produced traditional ag products. Say pork that's produced outside of confinement. Beef that's produced in what some people call natural way. It's not fed organic grains, but it is not fed artificial hormones or antibiotics. I think there's more opportunity in those particular areas and some of the other niches that may not be involved in traditional food or fiber. The burning switchgrass is not a traditional food or fiber use. We don't eat it, we don't wear it, we're using it for energy production. So, you know, there are a lot of ideas. It just depends on how that idea is going to be used.
What about fruits and vegetables?
You know, Iowa used to be one of the largest orchard states out there. We look at the southern part of Iowa, the poorer soils that we have, we can produce some of the best grapes for wine because we have poorer soils. We need to be looking at those alternatives. We have some good wineries in this state and in surrounding states, in Illinois and in Missouri. We have some good apple orchards. We need to be looking at those. We still need to be looking at the corn market and the soybean market and saying that we need to correct those. Bring those back into economic stability because we've got a lot of land in our state that's really what it's suited for, is producing corn and soybeans. Maybe an answer is if we were farrowing all of our hogs outside in huts on alfalfa, we'd lower our corn production because it'd take a few acres of corn ground out of production to have those hogs outside.
You mentioned the possibility of setting up some kind of system where consumers would know where their food would come from. And I don't know what you might know about any substantive effort or concrete proposals to do that kind of thing, but let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, there's a lot of efforts out there, and really those efforts started, or the successes have started in the Dakotas, where they've had a lot of producer-owned cooperatives. One of the ones that I like to use as an example is the Dakota Growers Pasta company in North Dakota. Those producers were producing a type of wheat that's used in making pasta. That wheat was being processed in Minneapolis and Virginia. It was trucked a long ways before it was processed. The thing is that geographically, this wheat can only be produced in North Dakota, Montana, and on up into Canada. So why are the processing facilities located south and east and away from where the product is used? So they formed a co-op, built their own plant, and have been very successful in marketing their product directly to consumers. They've got their own label, and I think that's what we need to be doing, is labeling Iowa ag products, because we have a very, very high quality ag product in this state. We have high quality pork, beef. We have high quality tofu where it's produced. We need to be saying that we are going to be the food capital of the world, not because we produce so much, but because we produce the best. And it is labeled, produced in Iowa by Iowa's family farmers. That takes some linkages. It takes producers like myself contracting with processors, contracting with retailers. I really don't have a desire as a livestock producer to own a packing plant, but I do have a desire to know exactly what that consumer wants by having that consumer vote with their dollars, as we talked about earlier.
So sometimes we think of that as vertical integration.
I look at vertical integration, the best example or drawing I ever saw of that was a handle on a pitchfork being shoved down at the farmer. This large corporation was vertically integrating themselves down into the farmer.
Mm-hmm.
I have nothing against turning that pitchfork around and shoving it back the other direction. Yes, that is vertical integration. I prefer to look at that aspect as vertical cooperation. I'm cooperating with that processor, and that processor is cooperating with me.
Mm-hmm. And if in some way we could encourage consumers to put a value on that, to pay for that,
yes,
look for it in the store, ask for it.
Ask for it in the store, and that gives me something that's vital to what I am doing. I need to be producing what the consumer is demanding. And we've seen the best example of this in the GMO debate, genetically modified organisms. You see nations in Europe where these products have been approved, they're legal, but the consumer is saying, hey, wait a minute, I'm not sure I want to purchase this.
Okay, I'm afraid we have to hold it there because our time is out, but that sounds like a good topic for another show, and we'll take that up sometime. I really appreciate your being here.
Well, thank you.
I want to thank all of you for joining us. My name again is Derek Maurer. You've been watching Iowa News and Views. We'll be on again next week at this very same time on this channel, so please come back.